everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive.
I'm excited to be here.
Today, we're diving into a topic that might not sound super exciting at first.
Boundaries.
But trust me,
It's way more interesting than it sounds.
we're going to be talking about the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend.
Such a good book.
And it's full of insights that can truly change your life.
Absolutely.
It's like we're giving you a secret weapon
For your relationships,
for your stress levels.
to gain more freedom in your life,
And it all starts by just reframing how we think about boundaries.
which the book does a great job of doing.
I love how they use the analogy of property lines.
Yeah, it's a really great analogy,
It just makes this whole concept of boundaries
which can be so abstract.
way more relatable.
Just like property lines define what's yours and what's your neighbor's.
Exactly.
Boundaries in our lives help us define where we end and someone else begins.
And I think that's so important
It really is.
because it's not just about saying no
It's about understanding what you're responsible for.
and what you're not responsible for.
The book really emphasizes that boundaries apply to all areas of our lives.
Like what?
Our physical boundaries.
Emotional
your time. Yes.
It's all encompassing.
It's not just about work or relationships or anything like that.
It's everything.
Everything.
So if boundaries are like those property lines,
Yes.
what happens when those lines get blurred?
Well,
What are the consequences of not having these clear boundaries?
the book gives this clever example
Okay.
of a water sprinkler system.
Okay.
Imagine your neighbor never waters their lawn,
Okay.
but every time you turn on your sprinklers,
Yep.
the water ends up on their side.
Ah.
Your lawn is dying,
Oh, no.
but theirs is thriving,
All because of your sprinklers.
all because of your water.
Wow.
It's such a powerful image of what happens when we lack boundaries.
I love that.
We end up pouring our resources,
Like our...
our time, our
Yeah.
energy, our emotional supply
Bless me.
without taking care of our own needs.
And you start to feel so drained.
Yes, you get resentful
Yeah.
because you're constantly giving without receiving anything in return.
And it's not that you're expecting anything in return, but...
But there needs to be a balance.
Exactly.
And just like neglecting your lawn can lead to problems,
Totally.
neglecting your own well-being
Yeah.
can have really serious consequences.
And I love how the book talks about your soul.
Yes.
Like, that's what we're talking about here.
Sure.
Protecting your soul.
Proverbs 4.23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it."
Powerful verse.
It really is.
And boundaries are essential for protecting our hearts.
Our minds,
Our spirit.
our everything.
Everything.
So when we talk about boundaries, we're not talking about building these walls
Right.
and shutting everyone out.
No.
It's more like having a fence.
With a gate,
Yes,
you get to decide who and what comes into your space.
and what stays out.
Absolutely.
So it needs to be permeable.
It does. Strong enough to keep out danger,
Yes.
but with the gates that allow for those healthy connections.
the good stuff to flow in.
And the good stuff to flow out.
Yes.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between protecting yourself and still being open to genuine relationships.
So the book talks about these different types of boundaries.
It does.
What are some examples?
Well, the book highlights several different types,
Okay.
starting with the power of words.
Okay.
Saying no and yes are like fundamental boundary markers.
Yeah.
They define what we will and won't accept.
I know. For me, saying no is really difficult.
It is for a lot of people.
Yeah, I feel guilty or like I'm disappointing people.
The book delves into that feeling of guilt later on.
Okay.
But for now, let's focus on those who struggle to say no.
Yeah.
The book calls them compliance.
Complying.
These are people who constantly say yes,
Even when they want to say no.
even when they really want to say no,
Yeah.
and they end up feeling so overwhelmed and resentful.
Yeah, because they're constantly saying yes.
They're constantly melting into the demands of others.
Yeah, they're losing themselves
Exactly.
in the process of trying to please everyone else.
And the book shares this really relatable story
Okay.
about Robert, who struggles to say no to his wife's demands.
Oh.
He ends up going broke,
Oh, no.
trying to keep up with their lifestyle, because he's afraid to disappoint her.
Oh, wow.
He's not setting clear boundaries around his finances or his time.
And it's causing so many problems.
So much stress.
So that's a perfect example
It is.
of how a lack of boundaries can have real-life consequences.
Yeah.
It's not just about feeling uncomfortable. This is
Well,
affecting your life.
Finances,
Well,
being,
everything.
and this pattern of compliance often stems from childhood experiences.
So it goes way back.
It goes way back.
So if a child is constantly punished or criticized for expressing their needs or saying no,
They might learn to suppress those feelings.
and become overly compliant as adults. So those early experiences can really shape our ability to set boundaries later in life.
They really do.
Wow.
Imagine not being able to say simple phrases like no, or I disagree, or stop that, or it hurts, without feeling anxious or guilty.
And I think a lot of people feel
I
that.
think so too.
It's very common.
This lack of basic boundary setting in childhood can have such a huge impact.
On our adult relationships.
Absolutely.
So then on the flip side, we have these controllers.
Yes.
These are people who have a hard time respecting the boundaries of others.
They do.
So what are some characteristics of a controller?
Controllers often bulldoze through no's.
Okay.
They might manipulate
Use anger.
yes to get their way.
So they're not taking ownership of their own needs and feelings.
Well, no, they're not.
And so they're trying to control others to fill that void.
Right.
I'm thinking of Steve,
Yes, Steve's the classic example.
the controlling boss,
Yes.
who just disregards his assistant Frank's boundaries,
Completely disregards them.
calls him at home during dinner,
Piles on extra work.
doesn't respect his time off,
Because Steve feels so entitled to Frank's time and energy.
creates a toxic work environment.
A very toxic work environment.
Then it leads to isolation.
Because people might stay with them out of fear or obligation.
But there's no genuine love and connection.
That's lost in the
Well,
process.
that's so sad.
They might think they're getting what they want,
But they're pushing people away.
creating distance and resentment in their relationships.
Now, there's a third type of boundary problem that the book mentions.
The non-responsives.
Yes.
They're emotionally detached and they avoid engagement.
And I think we're going to deep dive into that in a future episode.
We will.
So we have our compliance
Our controllers.
and our non-responsives.
Yes.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how these boundaries actually develop.
Okay.
The book dives into childhood development
It does.
and outlines these 3 critical phases that shape our ability to set boundaries.
Right.
What's that first phase?
The first phase is called hatching.
Hatch.
It starts in infancy, when babies begin to realize they are separate from their mothers.
So they're like, hey, I'm my own person.
Exactly.
That's a big realization.
It's a gradual process of developing a sense of self.
So then what?
Then they grow into toddlers,
Yeah.
and they enter the second phase called practicing.
Practicing.
This is all about exploration and testing limits.
I can picture it now.
Running around pushing boundaries, discovering the world with boundless energy.
They're like little scientists conducting all these experiments.
And parents play such an important role during this phase,
Right.
setting those firm but loving limits,
So you're giving them a safe space to explore
while also teaching them about consequences.
and the importance of respecting boundaries.
Yes.
So it's about guiding them toward healthy self-discovery.
Yes. Guiding, not controlling.
Right.
And then comes the third phase,
Okay.
rapprochement,
Rapprochement.
which brings the child back to reality.
Okay.
They realize they can't do everything they want and that they still need their parents.
Okay.
They're starting to understand that they are individuals,
Yeah.
but they also need connection and dependence.
So this is where the power of no comes in.
Yes.
Toddlers start asserting their independence.
Testing their limits
So parents need to create a safe space for them to say no.
without fear of losing love or approval.
It's just so important.
It helps them develop a healthy sense of self and their own boundaries.
So if they're constantly punished for saying no,
They might grow up afraid to assert their needs.
and then lead to those compliant patterns that we talked about,
Exactly.
it's about striking that balance
It is.
between parental authority and respecting the child's emerging individuality.
Absolutely.
So we have this roadmap for healthy boundary development,
Yes.
but things don't always go smoothly.
No, they don't.
The book talks about these boundary injuries
Boundary injuries.
that can disrupt this natural process.
And these injuries can happen through parental actions, like criticizing or punishing a child for setting boundaries,
or through traumatic experiences,
like abuse or neglect.
or even growing up in a chaotic or unpredictable environment.
Yes.
So, for example, if a child grows up in a home where disagreements are shut down,
Or they're constantly criticized for expressing their needs
they might develop a fear of setting boundaries.
and become overly compliant in their adult relationships.
Yeah.
Or a child who experiences trauma might develop a heightened sense of self-protection,
leading the
overly rigid
or
boundaries
even controlling behaviors.
as they try to create a sense of order and control in their lives.
So these early experiences really can have a ripple effect
A huge ripple effect
throughout our lives, impacting how we set boundaries in all sorts of relationships.
in all
With
relationships.
family, romantic partners.
Coworkers.
It affects everything.
It's like those boundary injuries create a blueprint
A blueprint.
that we carry with us,
Wow.
influencing how we interact with the world.
But the book offers hope for healing and learning to set boundaries.
Yes,
Even if our childhood wasn't ideal.
it does.
The book introduces the 10 laws of boundaries,
And laws.
which provide this framework for understanding and implementing healthy boundaries.
In all areas of our lives.
So shall we take a look?
Let's explore these laws.
See how they can empower us to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
I'm excited. Now, these 10 laws of boundaries aren't meant to be these strict rules.
Oh,
It's more like guiding principles to help us
yeah.
navigate relationships
Okay.
and take responsibility for our own well-being.
Okay, so the first one
The first one.
is the law of sowing and reaping.
Yes.
That sounds very biblical.
It
Does
is.
this apply to boundaries?
It absolutely has roots in Scripture,
Yeah,
highlighting that our actions have consequences,
right.
both for ourselves and for others.
So give me an example.
The book gives a really insightful example
Okay.
in the context of marriage.
Okay.
Let's say a husband frequently yells at his wife, but instead of addressing his behavior,
Yeah.
she tries to smooth things over
Okay.
by being extra loving,
So she's almost rewarding the bad behavior.
unintentionally rewarding the bad
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah,
He gets more love and attention even though he's being hurtful.
right.
She's not allowing him to experience.
The natural consequences of his actions.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
The book also talks about a wife
Okay.
who habitually overspends,
Oh.
and her husband constantly gets a second job
Oh, no.
to cover the bills.
He's rescuing her
He's rescuing her from the consequences of her actions,
from having to face reality.
which keeps her from facing the reality of her overspending.
So in a way, we think we're helping,
Yes,
but we're actually enabling.
we could be enabling unhealthy patterns.
Oh.
And that leads us to the next law,
Okay.
the law of responsibility,
Responsibility.
which reminds us that we can be responsible to others
Okay.
in terms of love and support,
Yeah.
but we are not responsible for their choices or feelings.
So it's about taking ownership of our own choices
Exactly.
and reactions.
And that goes hand in hand with the next law,
Okay.
the law of power.
The law of power.
We can influence people,
Okay.
but we can't control them.
Right. We can't control other people.
We cannot.
No matter how hard we try.
The book gives the example of a wife nagging her husband
To do chores.
to do chores.
It happens all the time.
She's trying to control his behavior,
Yeah.
but ultimately he's the one who decides whether or not he'll do them.
So what can she do?
Instead of trying to force him to change,
Yeah.
a healthier approach would be to focus on what she can control,
Which is.
her own actions and responses.
So how would that look?
She could set a boundary,
By saying,
saying something like,
okay.
I'm not going to nag you. If you choose not to help with the chores, then I'll hire someone to do them, but I'm not going to waste my energy trying to force you.
It's about empowering yourself
Yes.
instead of trying to control someone else.
Huge shift in perspective.
It-
And that leads us to the law of respect.
The law of respect.
This is about honoring the boundaries of others,
Okay.
even when we don't agree with them.
Even when we don't agree.
Everyone has the right to make their own choices.
Right.
And it's not our place to try to force them to change.
So it's about accepting people for who they are
Yes.
and respecting their decisions.
Even if they're different from our own.
And then we have the law of motivation.
Yes.
Healthy boundaries are set out of
Love.
not
And a certain
anger.
skill.
It's about protecting what's valuable.
Ourselves and our relationships.
Yeah.
It's about creating a safe and healthy space.
For everyone involved.
Thanks, Zach.
And then we have the law of evaluation.
Yes.
So as we start setting these boundaries,
They need to evaluate their effectiveness.
are they working?
Are they helping you create healthier relationships?
Are they leading to personal growth?
It's like a feedback loop,
Okay.
constantly checking in to see if your boundaries are serving you.
And making adjustments if they're not.
Exactly, because boundaries aren't meant to be rigid walls.
Right.
They're more like flexible guidelines
Yeah.
that evolve as we do.
That makes sense.
And the law of proactivity encourages us to take initiative.
in setting those boundaries,
Yes.
we can't just sit back and wait
We can't wait for others to change.
or hope things will magically get better on their own.
We have to be proactive.
We have to actively create the life we want,
Exactly.
take action.
And then there's the law of envy,
Envy.
which encourages us to focus on our own path,
Instead of
comparing ourselves to others.
comparison is the thief of joy.
It really is.
It's so easy to get caught up in what others have or what they're doing.
And lose sight of our own blessings and accomplishments.
And that can lead to so much unhappiness.
It can.
So it's about shifting our focus inward.
Appreciating our own unique journey.
Okay. And then we have the law of activity.
This emphasizes the importance of putting these principles into practice.
So it's not enough to just know about boundaries. We have to actually implement them in our lives.
We have to actively set those limits.
And hold ourselves accountable for maintaining them.
Exactly.
So we have to take action.
We do.
Okay, so then the last one.
The law of exposure.
Exposure.
This one's all about communication.
Okay.
Being assertive,
Yeah.
letting others know what our limits are
Clearly.
in a clear and direct way.
No more beating around the bush.
No more passive aggressiveness.
Just saying it like it is.
Exactly.
Now, all of that sounds great in theory,
It does.
but I want to see how these laws play out in real life.
The book is full of really relatable stories and scenarios.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's start with one of the most common challenges.
What's that?
Setting boundaries with family.
Oh, family dynamics.
Tricky.
Yeah, we're often bound by these strong emotional ties.
Loyalty.
Guilt.
Guilt.
It can be hard.
The book emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries with parents and siblings.
Even though it can be so difficult.
Even though it can be incredibly difficult.
So give me an example.
It shares the story of Susie,
Susie.
who feels guilty about not meeting her parents' expectations.
Okay.
She constantly sacrifices her own needs
To please them.
to please them.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
I think so too.
Wanting to please your parents.
Even as adults.
Even as adults.
But it's important to recognize that we have a right to our own lives.
And our own choices.
Exactly.
The book also talks about Terry,
Terry,
who struggles with financial dependence on his family.
he's an adult,
Yeah.
but he relies on his parents for financial support.
And that hinders his own growth and independence.
That's a classic example. The perpetual child syndrome.
Oh.
The book mentions this.
Yeah.
It's when adult children remain overly reliant on their parents,
Yeah.
preventing them from fully launching into adulthood.
And so the book stresses the importance,
Of adult children taking responsibility for their own lives,
even if it means,
disappointing their parents.
or facing temporary discomfort,
it's about honoring that natural progression.
of becoming independent and self-sufficient. So
Yeah.
it's not about cutting off your family
Yeah.
or rejecting their support,
Right.
but finding that healthy balance between connection and independence.
Exactly. And the book also dives into the concept of triangulation.
No, I've heard that term before,
Yes.
but I don't really know what it means.
Triangulation is when a third person gets pulled into a conflict
Okay.
between two people.
Give me an example.
For example, imagine a parent constantly complaining to one child.
About another child.
Yes, instead of addressing the issue directly with the other child,
Yeah.
they're using the first child as a sounding board or a mediator.
So it's like they're bringing in this third party to
Yeah.
a conflict that's really between two other people,
Exactly.
and that just creates more drama and tension.
More drama, more tension.
So what's the healthier way to deal with that?
The book encourages direct communication. The
Wow.
two people who are actually involved in the conflict.
Don't bring other people into it.
It's about creating healthy communication patterns
Yeah.
and respecting each person's boundaries.
So important.
Now let's talk about boundaries with friends.
Okay.
Healthy friendships require both connection
And
and distance.
distance makes the heart grow fonder.
The book uses the example of Meredith and Paul,
Okay.
who have different needs for togetherness.
In what way?
Meredith wants to spend a lot of time together,
Okay.
while Paul needs more space.
So they have different needs.
Very different needs.
And if they're not communicated and respected,
That could create friction.
definitely.
Learning to respect those differences and negotiate a balance
That works for both parties.
is so crucial for a healthy friendship.
So recognizing that everyone has their own rhythms and preferences.
Yes.
And not trying to force someone to fit into our mold.
Exactly.
Now, what about those friends
Yeah.
who are a little more demanding?
The ones who always need something.
Or take advantage of your kindness.
The book has some great advice for dealing with demanding friends,
I'm ready.
using the example of Kathy and Sharon.
Kathy and Sharon.
Sharon constantly relies on Kathy
Right.
last-minute favors,
Oh, yeah.
taking advantage of her generosity.
I think we all have a Sharon in our lives.
I think we do.
So what do we do about it?
The book emphasizes the importance of learning to say no,
Even to our friends.
even with close friends.
Yeah.
It's not about being selfish.
It's about
Protecting your own time and energy and resources.
It's about recognizing that you have a right to your own life.
Yes.
You don't have to be at everyone's beck and call.
And if someone reacts negatively to your boundaries,
Yeah.
it might be a sign that the friendship isn't as healthy as you thought it was.
It's a good litmus test.
It is.
Now, the book also touches on the challenges
Yes.
of non-responsive friendships.
Non-responsive friendships.
Like the example of Marcia and Tammy.
Yes.
Marcia feels like she's putting all the effort into the friendship.
Yeah.
Tammy seems emotionally distant.
Uninvested.
Talking to a brick wall.
It can be so draining.
So what do you do?
The book suggests that it's important to recognize these patterns
Yeah.
and to address them directly with the friend.
If they're not willing to change or put in the effort.
Then it might be necessary to create some distance
Yeah.
to protect your own emotional well-being.
It's not about giving up on the friendship. It's
Mm.
about recognizing that you can't force someone to be emotionally available,
If they're not ready or willing,
and you have to respect their boundaries.
even if those boundaries are creating distance.
Now let's move on to romantic relationships.
Okay.
The book emphasizes that boundaries are so crucial.
For healthy dating and marriage,
This is an area where boundaries can get really blurry
especially in those early stages of infatuation
when we're all swept up in the excitement.
and newness of it all.
Yes.
The book uses the story of Stephanie and Steve
Okay.
to illustrate how a lack of boundaries can lead to a loss of intimacy.
And resentment.
Stephanie constantly gives in to Steve's demands,
Okay.
sacrificing her own needs.
And eventually losing her sense of self.
Exactly.
I've seen that happen so many times.
It's like they become so entangled with the other person
Yeah.
that they lose their own identity.
So the book stresses the importance of maintaining a sense of self,
Within a relationship,
having your own true
Interests.
boundaries.
it's not about being selfish
It's about recognizing that you are a whole person,
with your own needs and desires.
and a healthy relationship allows space for both individuals to thrive.
Absolutely.
And that leads to the next point.
Which is,
The importance of taking responsibility for your own feelings and needs.
in a relationship,
It's not your partner's job.
to constantly manage your emotions.
Or fulfill all your needs.
You're responsible for your own happiness.
You can't expect your partner to be your sole source of fulfillment.
That's so important.
Yes.
So the book also highlights the importance of setting those clear boundaries around different aspects of the relationship. Physical intimacy, time together, and apart, finances, communication styles.
So it's about having those open and honest conversations.
About what works for both partners.
And finding compromises.
That respect everyone's needs and boundaries.
So that both partners feel safe to express their needs.
Without fear of judgment or rejection.
Okay, now what about boundaries with children?
The book emphasizes the importance of setting boundaries with children from an early age.
Yeah.
To help them develop responsibility and self-control.
So it talks about the difference
Between discipline and punishment.
So discipline is about,
Teaching and guiding.
and punishment is about,
Retribution.
so it's about setting those limits.
And providing consequences in a way that helps children learn and grow.
Instead of just trying to control them or make them feel bad.
Exactly.
And the book provides those contrasting examples of Jimmy and Paul.
To illustrate how different parenting approaches can influence a child's ability to set boundaries.
So Jimmy's parents are more...
They allow for disagreements.
Okay.
They teach him to respect limits,
Okay.
while Paul's parents either withdraw or become angry when he asserts himself.
Wow. So different.
Very different.
What are the outcomes of that?
Well, Jimmy is learning to navigate conflict constructively
Okay.
and to express his needs in a healthy way,
Good.
while Paul is learning to either suppress his needs
Oh.
or lash out in anger.
And those patterns can carry over into their adult relationships.
They can.
So these early lessons are so important.
They're foundational.
Now let's talk about boundaries in the workplace.
Ooh, the workplace.
This is where things can get really tricky.
It can be a breeding ground for boundary issues.
It's so easy to get caught up in those demands of the job.
The pressure to perform.
The desire to please your boss and colleagues.
The book highlights several common workplace boundary problems,
Wait.
starting with work overload.
Work overload.
We're often expected to do more with less,
Yeah.
which can lead to burnout and resentment.
It's like everyone's trying to squeeze more hours out of the day.
But there's only so much time and energy to go around.
So what can we do about it?
The book encourages us to take ownership of the problem
Okay.
and set realistic limits on our time and energy.
So how do we do that?
It might involve having those honest conversations with our bosses.
About
Workload expectations.
okay.
Learning to say no to unreasonable demands.
Hmm.
Prioritizing tasks effectively,
So we have to take control of our work lives
instead of letting our work lives control us.
and recognize that we have a right to a healthy work-life balance.
We do.
What about misplaced priorities?
That's another big one.
We're spending time on tasks that aren't actually our responsibility.
Or that don't align with our goals.
So easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of the day.
And lose sight of what's truly important.
So how do we realign?
The book encourages us to clarify our job descriptions,
Okay.
prioritize tasks effectively,
And
delegate when appropriate.
so it's about working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
Now, what about those tricky situations where
Mhm.
we have conflicts with authority?
Dealing with a difficult boss.
It can be a nightmare.
It can.
So the book acknowledges that our past experiences,
With authority figures,
like our parents or teachers,
can often play out in our relationships with our bosses.
so if we had a controlling parent,
We might overreact to a boss who's simply being assertive.
or if we're afraid of confrontation
We might be overly compliant with a demanding boss.
because of those past experiences.
Our past experiences can create a blueprint
A blueprint.
for how we interact with authority.
So how do we break free from that?
The book encourages us to recognize these patterns
Okay.
and address them in a healthy way.
So how do we do that?
It might involve seeking
To
therapy
work through past issues.
or practicing assertiveness skills
To communicate our needs more effectively. So it's about breaking free from those old patterns.
and learning to interact with authority in a more empowered way.
Okay, so one final point
One final point.
about workplace boundaries.
Leave work stress at work.
Easier said than done.
It is.
Oh.
But the book gives some helpful tips.
Like,
Creating rituals.
to help you transition.
Transition from work mode to home mode.
Okay.
Setting limits on checking emails or taking work calls after hours.
Yeah.
And prioritizing time for relaxation
And connection.
with loved ones.
So creating those clear boundaries between your professional and personal life.
Protects your well-being and prevents burnout.
You are more than just your job.
You deserve to have a life outside of work.
Okay, so beyond these external boundaries
Yeah.
with family and friends and partners and coworkers,
Yes.
the book also delves into setting boundaries with ourselves.
This is where things get really interesting.
I was going to say.
It's about recognizing that we need to set limits in certain areas of our lives
Okay.
to protect our well-being
Okay.
and prevent unhealthy patterns.
But how do you set boundaries with yourself?
It can feel like an internal battle,
Between.
your desires and your discipline. The book lists 7 key areas
Okay.
where we might need to set these internal boundaries.
Yeah, okay, hit me.
Eating money,
Okay.
time, task completion,
Okay.
speaking the tongue,
Okay.
sexuality,
Okay.
and alcohol, and substance abuse.
So that covers a lot of territory.
It does.
So give me an example.
Well, for example, if you struggle with overspending,
Yeah.
you might need to set a budget,
Okay.
track your expenses more carefully.
Okay.
Or if you struggle with procrastination,
Yeah.
you might need to break down tasks into smaller steps
Okay.
and set deadlines for yourself,
No, developing self-control.
making wise choices.
Aligning your actions with your values.
Exactly.
Now, the book shares this example of Jessica,
Jessica.
who struggles with an eating disorder.
Yes.
She has a lot of difficulty controlling her eating habits.
Because she hasn't developed those internal limits and a healthy sense of self-control.
So she's at war with herself,
It's an internal battle.
constantly battling those urges and cravings.
And the book emphasizes the importance of seeking support from others, a therapist, a support group,
Trusted friends and family.
to help develop those internal boundaries and break free from unhealthy patterns.
So setting boundaries with yourself is just as important.
And setting boundaries with others
So it's about taking ownership,
of your own well-being
creating a life.
that supports your growth and fulfillment.
Now, setting boundaries can be met with resistance,
It can.
both internally and externally,
You might be afraid of losing love,
or disappointing others.
facing conflict, feeling like we're being selfish.
So many fears and anxieties.
There are.
Yeah, it can be so scary,
To think about setting boundaries.
especially when you're worried about how other people are going to react.
Right.
I know for me, I hate conflict.
Yeah.
And the thought of disappointing someone,
Must be paralyzing.
it is. It's like you don't want to rock the boat.
But the book really emphasizes that healthy boundaries actually enhance our relationships.
So it's not about pushing people away.
No, it's not about pushing people away.
It's about creating healthier dynamics.
Exactly. If someone truly loves and respects you, they will support your efforts to set healthy boundaries.
But what if they don't?
That's a tough situation.
Yeah, what if they get angry or withdraw their affection?
It's important to remember that their reaction is more about them than it is about you.
Okay.
It might mean that they're not as comfortable with change
Well,
or that they're used to getting their way.
right.
It might even reveal that the relationship isn't as healthy as you thought it was.
So if they get angry,
Yes,
how do you deal with that anger?
the book has some great advice for dealing with anger.
Okay, I'm ready.
And it starts by recognizing that the person who is angry is the one with the problem,
Not you.
not you. You have a right to set boundaries, and their anger is their responsibility to manage, not yours.
Okay, so that's a huge shift.
It's a shift in perspective.
Instead of taking on their anger as my own,
Yeah.
it's recognizing that it's their issue to work through.
You're not responsible for their emotion.
Okay.
It also encourages you to stay calm,
Okay.
not to take the anger personally.
Yeah.
And if necessary, use physical distance or other limits to protect yourself if the anger becomes abusive or threatening.
So you're setting boundaries for yourself?
Within that
Even
interaction,
within that
to
interaction.
ensure your own safety and well-being.
What about the fear of being alone?
The fear of loneliness.
If I start setting boundaries, will I end up lonely or isolated?
The book challenges that fear by reminding us that healthy boundaries actually create space for more fulfilling relationships.
Wait, so boundaries lead to more connection?
They can, because when you set boundaries, you're communicating your needs and values.
Okay.
You're showing up authentically.
Yeah.
And that attracts people who respect and appreciate you for who you are,
So you're kind of filtering out the people that don't align with your values.
and making space for those who do,
And those connections will be deeper.
and more meaningful,
Very cool.
because they're based on
Mutual respect and shared values.
not on obligation or people-pleasing.
Now, one internal resistance that I often hear from people is guilt.
The guilt of setting boundaries.
If I set boundaries, I'm being selfish.
The book debunks this myth
Okay, good.
by explaining that healthy boundaries are actually an expression of self-love.
And self-respect.
And when you take care of yourself, you're better equipped to love and care for others
It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first.
before you can help anyone else.
Exactly.
And the book offers some strategies for dealing with guilt.
Like what?
It starts by recognizing that's often your problem, not the other person's.
Okay.
If someone is trying to make you feel guilty, it's usually because they're trying to manipulate you.
Into doing what they want.
So it's about recognizing those guilt trips.
And not giving in.
Remember, you have the right to make decisions that are in your best interest, even if those decisions disappoint someone else.
Their reaction is their responsibility to manage.
Exactly.
All this talk about setting boundaries sounds great in theory, but does it actually work?
It does.
Are there real-life examples of people who have set boundaries and had positive outcomes?
The book is full of inspiring stories about people who have transformed their lives by setting healthy boundaries.
Okay. Like who?
One that stands out is Shireen's experience in her therapy group.
Okay.
She was terrified to confront a friend about a boundary violation,
I can imagine.
but with the support of her group, she found the courage to do it.
Good for her.
And the outcome was amazing.
What happened?
The friend responded with understanding and appreciation for her honesty.
Wow.
And instead of damaging the friendship, it actually made it stronger.
So setting those boundaries didn't lead to conflict or rejection.
No,
It led to deeper, more authentic connection.
exactly.
That's amazing.
The book also shares the story of Wayne, who was constantly taken advantage of by his overbearing boss.
Yeah.
He was afraid to speak up.
Yeah.
But with the support of a coworker, he finally found the courage to set some boundaries around his time and energy.
What happened? Did he get fired?
No, actually the opposite happened.
Oh.
His boss actually respected his boundaries. It created a much healthier work dynamic for both of them.
That's so cool.
It's like setting those boundaries gave his boss permission to treat him with more respect.
So it shifted the power dynamic
In a positive way.
in a positive way. That's so great.
Now, all of this might sound like a lot to take in.
It is.
And you might be wondering, how do you even begin setting boundaries in your own life?
Where do I start?
One of the most helpful concepts in the book is the idea of measuring success in a new way.
Okay, I like that. How do you measure success when it comes to boundaries?
It's not about achieving some external standard of perfection
Okay.
or pleasing everyone around you.
This is not about what other people think.
No, it's about living in alignment with your values, honoring your worth, and creating healthy relationships that support your well-being.
It's more about internal shifts than external outcomes.
Exactly. It's about how you feel in your relationships, not about how things look from the outside.
It's about trusting your gut.
Trusting your intuition. And here's the thing.
Okay.
Sometimes initial discomfort or even negative reactions from others can actually be signs of progress.
Really, those uncomfortable feelings can be a good thing.
They can be. It might mean that you're breaking free from old patterns,
Okay, yeah.
challenging unhealthy dynamics, and stepping into a new way of being in the world.
So that's like growing pains.
Exactly.
Okay.
So instead of getting discouraged when things get tough, we can actually reframe those challenges as evidence that we're on the right track.
Love that.
And the book encourages us to celebrate those small victories along the way,
Yeah.
to acknowledge our courage and resilience,
Okay.
and to be patient with ourselves as we navigate this process of growth and change.
So we talked about Sherry, who was
Yeah.
struggling with boundary issues in all areas of her life.
She was feeling overwhelmed, resentful, taken advantage of.
By the end of the book,
She's transformed,
she's learned to apply these boundary principles.
and her life is completely different
So the book walks us through a typical day in her life.
after she's implemented these boundaries.
And it's a remarkable transformation.
It is
So she's calmer,
more confident
her relationships are healthier,
and more fulfilling
so her family dynamics have shifted.
dramatically.
In what way?
She's stopped enabling her husband and children
Okay.
and has empowered them to take responsibility for themselves.
How do they respond to that?
They stepped up. Her kids are more responsible, her husband is more helpful, and the overall atmosphere in the home is more peaceful and harmonious.
So by setting those boundaries, she created space for everyone to grow.
And step into their own power.
I love that.
And we also see a transformation in her friendships.
In what way?
She's learned to say no without guilt,
Okay.
to prioritize her own needs, create a balance between connection and separation.
So she's not constantly overextending herself or
Yeah.
feeling obligated to say yes to every request.
And her friendships are more genuine and fulfilling because they're based on mutual respect, not on obligation or people-pleasing.
And what about her work life? Yes.
I know she was struggling with Jeff.
Her incompetent assistant.
Yes.
That was a big challenge for her.
So by setting those firm boundaries,
She stopped enabling his behavior.
yeah.
He was forced to face the consequences of his actions.
And what happened?
He didn't get fired,
Okay.
but something even more remarkable happened.
Why?
He started to step up and take responsibility for his work
Wow, so her boundaries actually helped him to grow.
and become more accountable.
That's so powerful.
And finally, the book highlights how Sherry's boundaries have transformed her relationship with her husband, Walt.
I remember he was pretty resistant to her setting those boundaries at first,
He was used to having her at his beck and call.
but she stood her ground.
She did.
And as a result,
Walt started to appreciate her more,
really.
to see her as an individual with her own needs and desires,
So their relationship became
more balanced and respectful.
So by standing up for herself, she actually created a stronger foundation for their relationship. Exactly. And that's the transformative power of boundaries.
It's not about creating distance or conflict.
It's about creating space for healthier, more fulfilling relationships and a deeper sense of personal freedom and wholeness.
Well, deep divers, there you have it.
We've explored the wind of boundaries from every angle,
We've defined them,
understood their different types,
explored their development,
navigated them in various relationships.
and overcome resistance.
And remember, this is just the beginning of your own journey of discovery.
Take what you've learned today and start applying it to your own life.
Start small, be patient with yourself, and celebrate those small victories along the way.
The rewards of setting healthy boundaries are worth the effort.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
I love it.
Think about all the relationships in your life,
Okay.
family, friends, romantic partners, coworkers,
Okay.
and ask yourself, where do I need to build a stronger fence or create a wider gate?
Let that question guide you as you continue to explore the transformative power of boundaries in your own life.
And until next time.
Happy boundary setting.